there is something called design thinking. What is designing thinking, right? So as the world gets complex, we also need to start thinking differently, thinking in a more wider fashion. One of the things you want to learn about when you start learning about wicked problems is that they cannot be solved. They can only be responded to, they can only be engaged with, but they can't be solved. Right? Something like traffic in a city like Bangalore. As we start thinking about immediate solutions to it, we also, even if we just think about the first order, second order effects of it, we realize that an initial problem might lead to a bigger problem. And the other thing is, it's not like one wicked problem. It's all interrelated. Whenever you, as a in a diagnostic, say how a system should behave, you're already colored by from the point of view from which you are coming in. So in some sense, one way of making sense of the complex system is to look at the values and interests at play.
We all want our cities to be better governed, but we can't seem to get the outcomes we want. Why aren't solutions that seem simple not solvable? Why isn't the government doing what we just tell them to do? Each of us tell them a different thing to do, but they don't seem to get around to doing it. Today's episode is a conversation that will not arrive at solutions to problems, but it will help us understand how to think about them. Hello, I'm Sathya Sankaran and you're listening to OoruLabs, India's premier urban issues podcast. And in today's episode, we speak with Arvind Balasubramaniam, the director at the non-profit Socrates Foundation. He has worked on systems thinking and complexity theory for decades. In the first of the two-part series with him, we lay the groundwork of how to think about problems in our cities, why it is a wicked problem and how to make sense of it all. In the second part, we deal with how to respond to it. So let's jump right in. Thanks, Arvind, for coming on the show and trying to unravel the problems that we have. Most of the problems that I see going on in the urban space, right? So whether it is traffic or many of the issues we see around us, we all tend to jump to kind of simplistic conclusions around this, right? Because it's apparent, traffic, put a wider road will solve the problem. Freebies are wrong in a bus. These kind of things that we make conclusions on based on a popularity of opinion on one side, some rhetoric on the other side. Everyone seems to have a solution to some of these problems, but somehow they don't get implemented. How should we think about urban governance itself?
The outset, I would like to say that while the last few years I've looked at cities, urban systems and all more closely, but I'm not an urban expert, so to speak, right? However, I have two things which make it interesting for me. One, I have been an urban resident all my life. I've been in cities and towns of different. I've visited many. The other is also the fact that I've looked at systems thinking, the ideas around complexity science for the last couple of decades. So it would be good to have a conversation with somebody like you who's thought about urban systems in many ways and try and see how we can think about it in different ways, right? To actually, as you're pointing out, to see how we can introduce new frames of looking at the same things. Because it is true that we get overwhelmed by a lot of information as well. So how do you make sense of it? Look forward to the conversation on that.
No, that's interesting. So I'm not an expert as well, but we have both spent a lot of time thinking. You've been thinking about these kind of complexity for quite a while now, right?
I'll draw a lot from two kinds of courses that I have had a chance to co-facilitate in the last 5 odd years. One is this course on what we call as Think Better. So I work with this organization called Socrates Foundation, where Rajesh, my colleague and a mentor, and I have been facilitating this course called Thinking Better, right? So the whole, the way we phrase it is, there is something called design thinking. What is designing thinking, right? So as the world gets complex, we also need to start thinking differently, thinking in a more wider fashion. So this is one course which has allowed me to really spend time and think about how we think, as well as what affects our ability to make sense and so on. And there's another course which I ran with another colleague and mentor, Ashwin, who's also been on this podcast, which is on how do you solve public problems. So it's a course it's a postgraduate course on Introduction to Public Problem Solving. So in some sense, I feel that the two courses come together. Of course, Rajesh and Ashwin are also long-term collaborators. But if we can draw from that, and that will give us a little bit of structure to our conversation. Hopefully, it will also allow us to have do a bunch of thought experiments together.
What is a complex system really?
Any system has a bunch of, let's say, parts, and these parts interact, right? And a complex system is where the number of parts are high and the number of interactions or number of ways of interactions are very high, right? This is the textbook definition of what a complex system is. To think of it as, and a city is a good example of thinking of a complex system, right? Both the number of people, number of types of people doing different occupations, different roles in the city are high. At the same time, the interactions happen in many ways. There are, for example, people from outside the city come in. There is a lot of transient population in the city, right? As well as the city evolves a lot. All of us have heard. I've heard my uncle, and now I've started saying this, that Bangalore has changed quite a bit in the last 10 years, right? So the pace of change is also high. So all of this, I think, contributes to the fact that the system is complex. More than that, we have experienced it, right? It is overwhelming to think about, to wrap around something like a city and make sense of what is going on. Because if you focus on one aspect of it, we miss out on other aspects of it. So I would suggest that rather than even if we stick to our experiential understanding of a city or our country as a whole, then we have initial sense of what complexity is. Otherwise, there are many. It's English, right? So we shouldn't overthink it. If it appears complex, it is complex, right? And the complexity, the only thing we can imagine is that we can probably, one idea we can bring into the fact is complexity can exist at different levels. It's not as if a city is less complex than a country or a neighborhood is less complex than a city, because the kind of things that make even a family situation, right? We all have been in family situations that are very complex, right? And it comes as a result of many things. And maybe we can think about how do we deconstruct the complexity in any situation. I would say that we should just embrace the fact that as large human populations come together and so on, we are part of complex systems.
There's also this other term. I just want to clear out the definitions right up front, which is this that urban governance or governance in general is a wicked system. What does the word wicked really mean? What's a wicked problem?
So wicked problems is a term that I've been using quite a bit, right? And there are 2 or 3 sort of aha moments that have come for me in the last few years as I've been engaging with this word, right? It's another metaphor to be able to grasp the kind of problem. First of all, one thing which was aha moment for me was that we use the phrase wicked problem. I now tend to look at the word problem as more as a riddle or a puzzle rather than it's something to be solved. Because one of the things you want to learn about when you start learning about wicked problems is that they cannot be solved. They can only be responded to, they can only be engaged with, but they can't be solved. Right? So if you start thinking of it as a riddle or a puzzle, then it puts you it allows you to be a little bit more settled. Otherwise, you're always overwhelmed by it. The other thing is wicked problems have a few characteristics which we've observed, right? One is that what seems to be the initial solution to such situations end up being bigger problems, right? And that we've seen in many situations. And one of the examples which we thought we can carry through this conversation, that of something like traffic in a city like Bangalore. As we start thinking about immediate solutions to it, we also, even if we just think about the first order, second order effects of it, we realize that an initial problem might lead to a bigger problem, right? And the other thing is they're all, there's not like one wicked problem. It's all interrelated. So these are some, and it changes quickly. So there are other technical terms which I've heard. I'm trying to make sense of things like the fact that they're non-linear. So it's not as if gradually the severity of the problem increases. There are some places where it just breaks and becomes a much larger problem suddenly. So there are sudden shifts in the system. All these kind of characteristics, I think, just to put a frame around it, we've started using the word wicked problems. They're also there in, used as a technical term in systems thinking and so on.
So I can totally relate to that, because at some level we seem to think that a particular, let's take, I just released this episode on tunnel roads, right? Let's take that as an example, or some such intervention that we want to put in place. We are looking at a problem as a lack of a solution that we want. Traffic congestion in itself and the way we behave, the multitudes of us who make choices every day, like buying a motor vehicle and deciding to ply it when we feel convenient, cause a lot of second order, third order effects that you said, the ripple effects of which is the collective action problem that we see, which is collectively we face a lot of congestion. We fail to think of each of these solutions as having complexity embedded in them. This is so simple. If you put a flyover here, this junction at least is solved, and I would much rather have that. But the consequences of putting that might be good for some, might be bad for many others. So if this were a thing that we were dealing with, and when a common citizen like me comes up and says, I want to solve the problem at this junction or on this corridor, how should we go about and evaluate those solutions? Because we don't have information of how this city will suffer in the long run, or what other complex issues can be there. What are the questions you think we should be asking whenever we take a problem and say, I think I have a solution, I've seen this somewhere else?
There are two ideas which strike me as you were saying, both used in the context of wicked problems, complex systems, and so on. One is this idea of emergence, right? So there are properties of the system which only come when everything comes together, right? So we are making micro decisions. Some of us are buying vehicles. Some of us are deciding to take public transport. The government is introducing more public transport. It's introducing new policies within that, and so on. And individually, each of them makes sense for the person who's taking it. But together, it leads to properties of the system, both positive and negative, which are more than the sum of the parts. The phrase that we hear, right? Whole is greater than sum of the parts, right? And in fact, traffic congestion is a very accessible example of that, right? The traffic is moving smoothly for some time. Suddenly, 3 or 4 people, each of them trying to do the right thing from their point of view, is resulting in jamming of the road, and it can last for whatever time, right? One thing you could say is that each of them should have followed the rules. Should have the rules are set in such a way that if everybody follows the rules, it won't happen. But that is where the second point that you said also comes in, right? Which is that each of us in the system have different values and interests, right? So we could always say that if only everybody followed the rules, but people are not following the rules for whatever reasons, right? It could be the fact that they don't worry about the punishment because the governance system is not right. It may be that they don't even believe in the traffic rules. They feel that their need to go to a place is very important. Sometimes it's illegitimate, right? And the system also allows for it. Like if there's an ambulance, you don't question that they are breaking the rules or anything like that, right? And in other cases, it might be that this is how it happens in India, right? This is also the common kind of thing that we all say, right? So at many times when we come with this idea that everybody should follow in certain way, this word "should" I have a problem with, right? It is, I think, when we deal with complex systems, it might be more useful, right, to see what it is, how do people behave, rather than how should people behave. Because whenever you, as a in a diagnostic, say how a system should behave, you're already colored by from the point of view from which you are coming in, right? So in some sense, one way of making sense of the complex system is to look at the values and interests at play, right? And this comes again and again in many of these governance problems, right? We say that if everybody would follow their rules, correctly, it would work well. But there is a reason why they don't do it, right? And to understand the reasons behind each let's say stakeholder's action might give us a better sense of what the system is, what is the beast, right? And then we can, once we have a more rounded sense of why different people act in different ways, then we can also respond to it, I think, in a more holistic way, or in a more effective way.
I've complained about people coming the wrong way against me. It's not supposed to be done because we want an orderly flow of traffic in a certain way. But when you talk to him, he says, you went and put a divider where I used to cross before. Now I have to take 15, maybe a few minutes longer to go around and come back. And I would like to save that time and effort and whatever it is and go the wrong way. Now, ideally, as a society, we arrive at certain norms of saying this is right and this is wrong. But increasingly, I'm seeing that the right and wrong is clouded by why did this divider have to be there? Because the traffic for cars need to flow smoothly, but the two-wheelers and the cyclists and the pedestrians are given a go by. So when you design systems also from an infrastructure and a material standpoint, it appears to me that we make choices with certain biases in mind. So even in traffic, just like in life, there seems to be a few cohorts of people who seem to garner unreasonable attention and resources. Techno-managerially, we want a solution which is, we want to engineer a smooth flowing city in some way. That's how we see traffic. But most probably, the smooth flowing traffic is me as sitting in a car. I already carry that cognitive bias of everything else is an obstruction. So we've already created barriers for other. Is it really possible in a wicked system to have equity in these kind of things? Or is it going to be driven by certain sections which acquire extra clout?
Again, two or three things that come to my mind. I think, and this is probably the way this conversation is going to go, right? If we through this conversation solve the traffic problem in Bangalore, right, we will get Nobel Prize for peace, I guess. The amount of tension it creates, or maybe Nobel Prize for economics for the productivity guys, right? So one is that we should just try and have this conversation in such a way that let's see where it goes rather than solve for it. But
no, that's what it is.
Yeah. So one point that you made is this idea of where you stand depends on where you sit. And so if you're sitting inside a car, there's a nice striking image which I've seen that Srinu, who's also been on the show, shows in some of his presentations. Right, there are two photos juxtaposed against each other. In one, there is a bunch of cars. Right, most of these cars have one or at most two people, and on the other side there is a bus. Right. The bus takes, let's say, 1/10 the space, but accommodates the same amount of people traveling that route. Right? Each of us is also that, right? Sometimes we drive by car, sometimes we take a cycle, sometimes we take public transport. The decision to make on that, it is difficult that every time we take the decision, we take this systemic view. What is the best thing for the system? Because we don't have the information around that today whether it is best for the system. I'm not saying for individual. For individual, you use Google Maps. You say whether going by bike or car or public transport, which is the fastest one. Look at the temperature outside. You make a lot of decisions on the basis of that, but very difficult to see the whole system, right? So so one of the metaphors which is generally used in systems thinking is that of the parable around the six blind wise men and the elephant. Right? Everybody is seeing one part of the system of the elephant, and they don't even know there's an elephant. Right? You think there's a fan, there's a rope. So something like a urban mobility. If you just if we forget it from the problem to the make it the puzzle. The puzzle is urban mobility. Right? How can people travel from for different reasons in a city like Bangalore in a way that is safe, that is that reduces pollution, that reduces noise, all of that, right? And also gets them to, for the main reason, for commuting to work, going to a school or college, going to the park, for whatever reason. Right? That's what we want to improve. So this one thing that definitely comes is this idea that systems are designed or solutions are thought with some biases which creep in, right? For example, one again striking example which comes to mind is the fact that when during COVID the lockdown was announced and we saw these images of a lot of migrant workers walking back to the village. Nobody. It just got missed out. Nobody intentionally, obviously, did that, right? And immediately, everybody as a society, the government, everybody responded to it. But that's the thing, that there are few people who have disproportionate say in what happens in the system, and that depends on many factors, including tradition, including who's in the decision making place. And so one idea around this, which comes up in many places, is can the decision making be more diverse, right? If we have people with diverse interests and into the room in some way participate in the decision making process, it might be more messy as a process, but the decision that might come may take into account diverse perspectives. So that's one way of saying, when you lay out the problem statement itself, can it be a more richer sense of the problem?
The dichotomy here then is, let's say people's aspirations are to get from point A to point B very quickly, as soon as possible, basically, right? That's what it is. You're not expecting to waste your time or while your time getting from a place to a place, unless you're going on a tour somewhere and you want to enjoy the scenery. So we don't want scenic routes inside the city. On the other hand, those choices might lead to the city being inefficient. For an example, the bus route might not be the fastest really all the time. In most cases, it might not be. In some cases, over longer distances, they might be. And it introduces a few frictions like changeovers and things like that. So you would not automatically make a choice to use a personal vehicle as many times as possible. On the other hand, when people make these personal vehicle choices, the more and more we do, the less and less efficient the city starts becoming, and overall the city becomes more congested. All the externalities that we talk about, like pollution and all of those things, start coming up. The urban heat island effect, all this. So when somebody needs to make a choice, left to the individual with the diversity and everything else, it may not necessarily lead to efficient outcomes. But you have your freedom of choice and things like that built in. But collectively, we all point the finger at each other, saying that if only that guy had been on a bus or taken something else or not come out at all, then I would go free. So how do you make these trade-offs? Because there is a trade-off at all points in time when you make a solution. It seems increasingly like trade-offs are made either towards individual choices and freedoms or towards even a simple thing like a one way. We look the other way. One is the cost of enforcement is very high. It takes a lot of people to keep catching everybody. When the exception becomes the rule, it's kind of difficult. At the same time, the complexity is the RTO gives driving license, the police enforce, the BBMP build roads. Between them, they don't know who does what, and it falls off the radar. So there's so many levels, right? On the governance side, there's something socially how we behave and make individual choices. How should we look at trade-offs, and how should people view these trade-offs? And when do we say a managerial efficient city dominates over your choices and your freedoms?
I'll take a step back, right? Trade-offs come in the sense when we have solutions. We are still trying to make sense of the system. And we haven't, right? It's because you started by saying that the people need to go from one place to another. We realize that itself can be questioned and said, how many can you reduce the number of times you need to go from one place to another? Whether it's working from home or also services being delivered closer. We hear the different ideas floating, right? One idea we hear is our 15-minute city, right? So can the city be planned in such a way that many of your, whatever you need to do on a day-to-day basis, it can be done within a radius of, let's say, 5 or 10 kilometers, right? And many of us live in gated communities where, actually speaking, if except for the few days that you need to go for either very specific purposes, rest of it is quite close by, right? So that's one way of I'm just saying that this is where I would look to you as well to provide what are the other factors that affect, right? For example, each of us can say from my own point of view, there are days that I take a public transport, and it depends on many things. It depends on the weather as well. So there are certain set of factors about, let's say, traffic or not, let's say mobility. Mobility is more positive than traffic. Traffic already gives you a sense of congestion and so on, right? So we want to move from one place to another. How can you move in a city effortlessly, affordably? Bunch of factors. It's not just one factor. So it's not just the least amount of time, because some modes of transport might be faster but might not be affordable for many sections of the population. Those factors also come. So let's say there are a bunch of factors which again I'll introduce a phrase which contribute to material complexity. right? Which is around traffic planning, around infrastructure, around individuals making a plan, looking at the weather, things like that, which in some sense are things that can be solved by what we broadly call a strategy. You can build a strategy around that, right? It may be around your fleet planning. If you're running the transport company, it can be or it could be around, let's say, uh, this staggered timings in office. If you're running the corporate office and you want to support your employees, it could be a bunch of other things, right? This is one set of factors which are all important and which need to be taken up. And broadly, and I'm using the word strategy in a very broad sense to say it can be addressed by solving for it using math, science, and management and things like that, right? And this is what typically, at least another jargon is they lend to techno managerial solutions, right? So that it can be solved. It can even one thing it can be solved. If it is solved in Bangalore, then it can also be solved in, let's say, in Mysore with some variations. Then there is the kind of things which is around things like whether bus lane should be there. One is of course drawing the bus lane, but should bus lane be there? Right? This is the other thing that at least Bangaloreans will know, right? Should we have a suburban versus metro, which is better, right? Who gets left out? That's the reason why many of the implementations take a long time and so on, right? And then, of course, recently about women getting to travel in buses for free. Right? So these are choices which are not, which are also important choices, but these are choices which have to be solved by social and political process. It can't be solved by a strategy. It has to be solved by changing the culture, changing the way people decide. For example, one thing which I've heard in many circles is that the day the rich people start taking public transport will improve. One, congestion will come down because the less number of cars on the road, right? Those kind of things will happen, right? And the way to reach that could be something like a congestion tax, could be something like better ways of travel, so that people are nudged to take public transport. But these are choices which are again at the intersection of values and interests. They are not a clear efficiency game, right? It's also norms, what is seen as good behavior. Those kind of things also come in. So in some sense, what I'm offering is that in these kind of problems, maybe at the risk of being reductionist, we can think of it as what are the factors that contribute to the material complexity, and what are the factors that contribute to the moral complexity, and then see how they interact with each other. So in some sense, that will help us also answer the perennial question in India, right? Which is, they're such great policies if only they were implemented, right? And the implementation is where the big challenge comes in, both capacity in culture and things like that. So this is one way of sort of deconstructing the elephant.
So I've heard the podcast recently on that free bus tickets, and most of this seems to be either a fight between a freebie and not freebie as a fiscal imperative, right? But the broader problem we are trying to solve, or at least some people are trying to solve, is should we empower women this way or some other way? Of course, if you apply the standard land Pritchard's way of thinking about it, lack of your solution is not the problem. You need to have alternate solutions to a problem. So if you look at women's empowerment, there are many other things, right? Or women's workforce, increasing women's workforce participation. There are lots of things. It could involve getting them jobs, making them, allowing them the options to do things, and one of them is probably enabling them to travel in public transport at the lowest cost, or getting from point A to. And in looking at this as one of the small pieces of the overall solution, there is this moral problem you brought out. This is the equivalent of affirmative action, right? Some people are for it, some people are against it, some people say no, there is no need to do any equity there, it will automatically emerge. Literally, some people just say, why should women get anything at all? So how do we think about moral choices versus material choices that we make? Because our system is divided into techno-managerial bureaucracy and the political class who make these moral decisions. And we make these choices saying that these people have these morals and these sets of values, and these people have these morals and these sets of values, and hence we choose collectively, and the rest of us get to live with whatever moral choices some of us have made based on the first past the post. How do we arrive at things outside of certain material complexities, such as is it a culture of the place that is different? Because I don't see how Europe is different from China, is different from US, is different from India, is different from some other place. There seems to be something, and does that evolve? Does that change? How should we look at these choices we are making?
Imagine that we have a problem where we are interested in figuring out what is the nature of the problem. So one approach, which again I'll draw from the method that we use in both in the organization where I work as well as in the course that we teach, is can we list down the different schools of thought? What do we mean by schools of thought? The big ideas around a particular problem. So in the traffic case, it need not only be the moral arguments around it, right? Like we talked about this free bus passes, whether affirmative action is required, whether this women's empowerment through mobility is required, things like that. It could even be in the case of our other example of traffic. There is a big idea around congestion tax. There's a big idea around, let's say, 15-minute city, around metro or suburban rail metro, all of them getting active, multimodal. Can we just organize these 4 or 5 big ideas? Not to say that they all compete with each other, but what is the common ground between them? What are the areas where fault lies between? Where do they disagree with each other? Where do they agree with each other? And all this is to have a more structured conversation, right? Now, in a case of a dinner time conversation, if you want to do it about this, we may only do it like we are doing it right now, right? But if you want to, if you're really, invested in the idea for whatever reason, for professional reason, or because it's something that you experience and you want to be part of solving that, it could be waste management, it could be traffic, and that's how many people, including somebody like you, has jumped into the fray, right, of trying to be part of the solving ecosystem. So then you be a little bit maybe more deliberate about it, a little bit more methodical about it. You also collect the basic data around the facts. So you need to at least have I would say, while this conversation is good for practice, and practice is important when you think about system thinking and so on. It cannot only be done in a professional setting, but if you're going about it in a more slightly more structured fashion, we need to at least get the basic data around see how many vehicles, what are the big issues, what are the big initiatives that are taken up, and what are the big schools of thought. So if we get that around, and that's I think is a sort of a prep work for us to get into the next level of conversation, so to speak. Maybe we could do that, right? We could say that if this is interesting for the audience, we say let's go about it more systematically in the next month or so, where we at least bring the data together, present it, also talk to different people. And here I think it's important to get people who very strongly believe in each school of thought, the best proponents of it, listen to them, right? And you stay, if you're the person who's making sense, you stay slightly away from the problem, right? And say, what do they each listen to them in a way that you give them the benefit of doubt that they're coming maybe with some ideological biases, but they also have thought about it very deeply, right? And if we can, in some sense, synthesize these different big ideas, or even summarize it first, right, and then maybe synthesize it, then we can look towards the other part of this conversation, which is how do you respond to wicked problems? How do you respond to complex systems?